So before we start, I'll issue a quick content warning for discussion of violence and sexual assault in this video. Please turn away if those things make you uncomfortable, and if not, enjoy. So this month, I sat down with my dad and watched the Jason Statham movie, The Wrath of Man, a pretty middle-of-the-road basic revenge thriller. Normally, I just brush these kind of movies off, but after I watched it, I did start to think critically about the film, specifically how it pertains to revenge on film in general. The movie focuses much of its runtime on this weird mixture of rooting for revenge and seeing acts of violence as shocking and terrifying. We're left to savor the death of Scott Eastwood's villain, yet the deaths of all the characters we're supposed to root for are quick and almost clinically brutal. So I think there are definitely some themes in the film, ones I don't think are really explored to their fullest extent, but nevertheless they were themes that I had in my mind when I watched Panos Cosmatos' Mandy, a aesthetically rich and beautiful film that is also, at its core, rooted in revenge. Now, I wouldn't say this movie tries to reinvent the wheel when it comes to revenge on screen. We're obviously meant to feel horrified and devastated when Mandy is murdered by a bunch of Jesus freaks, and when those subsequent Jesus freaks, led by the evil Jeremiah, is killed by Nicolas Cage's character Red. We're supposed to feel empowered and satisfied. Yet Mandy's still able to make some clever commentary on the nature of revenge, specifically through what it frames its story of revenge around, a hellish, oversaturated world of devastation. We discover pretty early on the philosophy of Mandy herself. She's an empathetic and caring person looking to help those things which fall victim to the outside world. This is reflected in a really sad interaction she has with a deer early on, a story she tells of being horrified when her father forced her to watch him kill baby birds, and a scar Mandy bears on her eye, something which establishes her as a victim of the world on a visual level. However, her partner, Red, is different. We first see Red in the film wielding a chainsaw to cut down a beautiful forest. He looks at this beautiful forest with unmasked anger and, in this way, you can see a consistent piece of Red's character in the film, his violent nature and his struggle to fit into harmony with the natural world. Let's analyze one of the film's most important scenes to better understand this. So when laying in bed together, Red and Mandy have a conversation about their favorite planets, and Mandy says hers is Jupiter because of the massive storm which rages on its surface, the eye of which could fit the whole world. We might come to see Mandy and Red's life as taking place in the eye of a hurricane itself. The pair are surrounded by a vicious world of devastation, yet Mandy is helping them to find their own home of peace within all that. Cage will later be framed as wanting to go into the city, to embrace the more urbanized, chaotic storm that Mandy is attempting to distance from. Red's response to the question is equally as important, with him saying that his favorite planet is Galactus, the fictional comic book character who consumes planets, framing Cage once more as an agent of destruction. And with that, we start to get into Red's actual character. So let's talk about Cage's performance in the film. I won't lie, when I first watched this, I couldn't help but feel as though Cage felt wrong. Like his anger and rage were just teeming beneath the surface, waiting to be released in the film's final act. And yeah, I still feel that way, but now I see the genius of that decision. Cage is perfect for this role, as he plays a man teeming with desire to be let out of his domestic trap. More on that later. Every moment of peace with Red can be seen as the calm before the storm, something made all the more interesting when we consider how this movie was heavily marketed as a revenge thriller, despite not even beginning that descent into vengeance until almost an hour in. In contrast to Mandy, whose apathetic passivity to the harmful things of the world carries into her confrontation with Jeremiah, thus dooming her, Cage's rage and violence is always teeming below the surface, waiting to be set free. He mourns Mandy and his own possible salvation, yet he's soon deeply rooted into seeking vengeance, only weeping again when it's to his advantage, when showing that vulnerability allows him to progress in his violent goals. Now this violent path Red goes down is very much rooted in male sexuality, so let's take a look at sex in the film as a whole. As we've already touched on, Cage's descent in the film is one from semi-peace to total violence, and this might also be seen in a sexual context. For its entire first half, the film is all but sexless, focusing more on the loving relationship between Cage and Mandy. Even when sex is implied, it's never framed in a way which suggests domination or violence. Sex is also implied with the character of Jeremiah Sand early on in the film. Yet this sexual act, while clearly shown to be dominating and manipulative, is also only implied, representative of the film descending into the taboo alongside Cage's character. Around the halfway mark of the film, though, it does begin to embrace sexuality in a few select scenes. The first, and possibly most notable of which, might be when Jeremiah displays his naked body to Mandy, suggesting sexual assault. This scene is particularly important in both its execution and what it implies. For one, Mandy is able to belittle Jeremiah by laughing at his self-centered nature, emasculating him in a way only she, someone conscious of the system and seeking to rise above it all, can do. I'll also note the way in which the film latches onto this idea of Jeremiah as impotent here. Mandy is able to belittle Jeremiah by not meeting him on his own playing field. She is drugged and weak, yet still able to tear down the would-be god. This is clearly contrasted with Cage's own tearing down of Jeremiah at the film's end. Cage is able to belittle Jeremiah by dominating him, not laughing at the absurdity of Jeremiah's ideology, but rather falling victim to it and simply outperforming Jeremiah in his twisted display of masculine aggression. Notably, the moment at which Cage kills Jeremiah is almost orgasmic, made all the more interesting by Jeremiah's offering of oral sex moments before. And this concept of masculine sexual aggression seems to permeate every other instance of sex in the film. When Cage comes for the Black Skull bikers, one of them is watching a dominating pornographic film. This character also possesses a sharp blade in place of his genitals, making the comparison even more understandable. Brother Swan is murdered in a very sexual and phallic way. Cage has a literal size contest with another cult member, albeit with a chainsaw, and before killing her, Mother Marlene offers Cage sex, noting her empathy as reason he should accept. This interaction also cleverly frames Cage in opposition to the concept of empathy. Another interesting aspect of sex in the film comes from the animated dreams Cage has in the picture, where he sees Mandy as both naked and in pain, supporting this idea he's built of himself as seeking to quell Mandy's pain and also act as a male savior. The one time we truly see this dream version of Mandy happy is when she pulls a shining stone from the stomach of a dying tiger, obviously representative of Cage's belief that his suffering will somehow bring Mandy happiness and peace. I think we might also do well to note the similarities between Mandy pulling this emerald from a dying beast and the story of a warlock doing something similar that she narrates towards the start of the film. This helps us to both see how Mandy's essence is becoming a part of the world now, and how Cage is desecrating everything she stood for. Alright, I know it's been on all of your minds, so let's talk about the tiger. There's a scene in this movie where Cage travels to meet with a mind-reading LSD manufacturer who he learned about from a drug vision and who keeps a pet tiger. Pretty mundane stuff. So, judging from the connection with tigers already established for Cage, I think we might obviously assume that the tiger here is a stand-in for Cage himself. Now, I think the entire interaction Cage has with the dealer here is more of a spiritual one. The dealer has obviously been shown to him after he pushed himself further into the hellish path which the film watches him stray down, and the dealer helps Cage find the children of the New Dawn. So we might assume that the dealer is a manifestation of Cage's inner desires to seek revenge. For one, he's making LSD, thus steering others towards the drug-fueled mania which has consumed Cage. Of course, LSD is not an inherently evil drug, but the fact that the dealer seems to only be revealed to those twisted enough to find this evil goop helps to reinforce the idea that he's sending people on bad trips of violence and destruction. The life of Cage and Mandy was a colorful yet peaceful one, representative of a blissful trip. Yet, since Mandy's death, a more violent and stressful trip has consumed the film, when steeped in bright reds. And while we're on the subject of color, I do want to note the use of white light here, meant to signify the dealer as an objective viewer of the universe. However, we know this is a mere act, as he's steering red towards darkness. Ideas which support this might be the description of the radio tower in the script as rusty and decaying, literally covered in red filth, the fraudulent and dingy exterior of the room, which emanates a mere guise of objectivity, and finally, Panos' use of both the clinical and the hypersaturated to represent the oppressive system in his previous film, Beyond the Black Rainbow. Let's also speak on the actual tiger. So the dealer says that he keeps the tiger because when it is calm, he knows everything is good. But Cage seems to somehow sway him into seeing this as wrong, understanding that his imprisonment of this beast for his own personal gain is false. If Cage is the tiger, then might we assume that this is coming as an assertion of his desire to be uncaged? an admission that his life with Mandy was not ideal for someone of his nature, and possibly even that Mandy was holding him in an oppressive domestic bliss for her own security. Obviously none of this is true, and completely violates the love Mandy and Cage share, and the independence of Mandy herself, and also of Cage. Yet, we might easily see this as another layer in Cage's distancing from Mandy, as she becomes an idea, an aesthetic, and he moves into the role of male savior and badass. Cage might see himself as a tiger, but we know the truth, that he's merely using this guise of aggression and masculinity to hide the broken man which lies beneath it all. I'll also speak on color in the film because it's one of the most notable and interesting aspects of the picture. I've already spoken on the use of reds to signify anger and violence, and other more varied colors to signify other emotions, but I'll pay special attention to a specifically important scene here, the one in which Cage first meets Mandy in a flashback. We see that the world Cage inhabited before he met Mandy was a very colorless and drab one, and that she possessed all the colors of the rainbow in her being, a collection of various emotions and love which she brought to Red. She lifted him out of a place of emotionless stasis and into one of emotional celebration. However, we see that Cage, in the absence of Mandy, latches onto anger above all else, ignoring the other colors of the world. Just like the children of the New Dawn, who bring with them only the harsh reds of evil and anger, Red's aura has become one of darkness. He's missed the lesson Mandy was hoping to bestow upon him, that life is full of complex feelings and emotions, instead choosing to congregate around only one in her absence. And this colorless world of blandness is something repeatedly brought up in the film. We might see it as a manifestation of the industrial, consumerist society. Think of oppressive gray skylines. And Cage seems to actually prefer this world. He might truly see himself as a manifestation of violence, resolving that a place where all emotion is suppressed would be an easy improvement from his current life, where emotionality is encouraged. Notice how he's particularly colorless in his personal life before Mandy's death, only allowing color to permeate his existence when Mandy helps him to do so. After the passing of Mandy, Cage's character is pushed into a state of complete red. Now I think if we are to speak on Mandy, we have to mention the pretty obvious connection the film has to rock music. The picture itself begins with a poem, one lifted from a death row inmate convicted of murder, which speaks on the inmate's desire to be rock and rolled in death. It's a poem fitting for the off-kilter rock aesthetic of Mandy, yet also one which holds significance. So as I previously mentioned, the poem comes from a death row inmate convicted of murdering someone while on drugs, so we might obviously see a connection between this inmate and Red, someone so consumed by the hellish landscape of their existence that they desire violent rock and roll even in death. I imagine that Red's state at the end of the film would be soundtracked with some hard rock, but the film pays special attention to the softer side of rock throughout. Take, for example, the mention of The Carpenters, the opening song by King Crimson, or even the score of the film, which contains many soft rock cuts. This might be read as Mandy's brand of rock, soft and ethereal, something that Red, by the end of the film, has completely missed. Like a man tried for murder, speaking on his love for a genre so tied to uplifting oneself and loving others, Red has completely missed the point by the end of the film. This concept of rock as a cultural force upholding the ideas of Mandy is further explored in other ways throughout the film. For one, we might want to look towards Red's complicated relationship with politics. He, at the start of the film, seems to disavow Reagan-era talking points, as we all should, when he silences the conservative ramblings of the figure on the radio. Yet Red goes on to call the children of the New Dawn hippies, thus demonizing the counterculture movement like many conservatives of the era. He also becomes visibly upset over the damaging of his shirt later in the film, cementing a consumerist edge to his dissent. We might also do well to look again at Cage's profession. He's destroying the forest, pushing conservative ideas of resource harvesting and environmental damage. Fittingly, when Cage is far into his rampage, we see him wake up under a hill of fallen trees, helping us to also see his ascent as one into rage-fueled conservatism. I mean, he literally calls this biker a snowflake, and the children of the New Dawn mirror this brand of missing the point. As previously mentioned, Jeremiah lauds the Carpenters, and Brother Swan goes out trying to quote rock and roll rhetoric, saying it's better to burn out than to fade away. Mandy is ultimately about loss as anger, letting grief consume your world to such an extent that you're trapped in a hell of your own making. Fittingly for the character of Red in the film, hell becomes those things he's constantly tempted to embrace, whether they be masculine aggression, a disregard for others, or just general darkness. Red and Mandy embody that eye in the storm which is life, and when Mandy is lost, Red loses himself to the wind Mandy had fought so hard to help him avoid. By the end of the film, we are ourselves forced to confront our own involvement in the story, to reflect on the brutal deaths we cheered on in our now monstrous hero, to face the gaze of a woman who, in her most clear moments, wept for a life lost to the harshness of the world. Red's story is tragic in more ways than one. He desperately needs to find a place of healthy emotional expression, and while it's not perfect, his life with Mandy is very much that. Yet her death sends Red on a downward spiral of poor emotional expression. He misses the lessons Mandy was trying to teach him. And boom, that is another video done. This is going to complete the semi-trilogy of horror-themed videos I've been doing recently. The one about the witch in the lighthouse, obviously, and then the one about Midsommar. I'm planning on trying to get back into maybe some music stuff going forward, but I do have another big film script planned and on the way. So I hope you all appreciated this video. I hope that you enjoyed it. And until next time, peace.